Showing up for other writers. I love getting books written by my friends, or people I only slightly know, or want to know, or a teacher, or maybe I'll buy a book that's for sale at a reading I attend for a local author. People in the arts need all the support they can get. It tends to be a lonely life. The same goes for musicians, theater artists, filmmakers, dancers, all these people I know that do things in the arts. It's good to support them. I draw the line at improv comedy and karaoke. It's always good to establish boundaries early on with friends. Whenever I discover that people I know are writers, I'm curious to read their work. It gives me a chance to see them through two lenses: the manner in which they present themselves to the world in their unscripted day-to-day life, and how they communicate on the page, after periods of deep consideration and multiple editing passes. Even if the book's subject matter doesn't interest me, I still feel that not only should I supportively buy a copy, but I should also read it, and hope that I don't discover that one of my friends is an awful writer. That can be difficult. Well, for me. Should I admit that it is very, very hard for me to like someone whose art I don't like? Probably not. It's petty, and not one of my better traits. My criteria for this video is uneven. Because I'm a socially awkward introvert, some of these authors barely know me, or maybe don't know me at all, but I've been in their sphere, known them to some degree from their personal lives, and they've had an impact, large or small, on me. Anyway, I've scanned my bookshelves and grabbed some of these volumes to share. I'm a bit embarrassed that over the decades, as I moved from one place to another, I've let go of so many of these personal items. Also, I might have overlooked some. My books aren't currently well sorted. They're scattered all over the house, and some of my books have somehow managed to merge with those of my partners. I've decided to separate them roughly by date of acquisition, which will basically correspond with where I was living at that time. So I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and one of the first books I had inscribed to me by an author that I knew was this book, The Keys to Dallas by Lon Tinkle. I suspect it's a kid's book, but it's just the basic overview of the city. And inscribed to me 1970. I think this might have been from an author signing at the Aldrich bookstore, which is what my bookstore my father owned. Previously, it was owned by the Aldrich family. And I have vague memories of various book signings where it was an opportunity to serve sherry and put out snacks and have kind of a salon type environment. Lon Tinkle was one of these really interesting personalities. He was a professor at SMU, and both of my parents, I believed, had him as a teacher. I suspect I've read that book, but I don't have a strong opinion about his writing style. I must have read it back when I got it when I was a kid. Another author who was in and out of bookstores in Texas, certainly my father's bookstore, was Larry McMurtry. And I've met and talked to him several times over the years. I think I've probably was a little bit more on chatty terms with his sister. But I'm not sure if I would have read his books if I didn't know him. And as much as I liked his early modern westerns, Horsemen Pass By, Last Picture Show, Leaving Cheyenne, it was that sort of middle period, or that sort of period following it, the books that he wrote of youngish people growing up in in bigger cities, Houston, uh, Washington D.C., and those places. And I found similarities with other authors I was reading or maybe started to read, like Thomas McGuane and even people like Barry Hannah and people like that. But I've really enjoyed his books. I have bought, sold, read quite a few of them, and don't have a lot at the moment. I don't have anything at all by C.W. Smith, who was a early writing professor I have, who I've read probably about half of his books. I have a few of them on a digital ebook format, but I don't see anything around the house at the moment. Other bookstores that I worked at, like Half Price Books in Dallas and a Borders, Fort Worth, and a Borders bookstore, I met Matthew Guest, who just this awesome comic book artist, who I think has gone off to years ago get his MFA and may be teaching now in the universities. And spent some time in a far west Texas town of Redford, which is down the southern end of Presidio County, just on the Rio Grande. Looked across the river, and there was Mexico. And one of my truly favorite people in the world, a good friend of mine, Enrique Madrid, he did the translation for this early expedition account into that region of the Chihuahua Desert. And he's done some other sort of academic type books, and most of the books here probably are fiction with a little bit of poetry, not a lot of nonfiction. But I've actually, this is a subject that I'm interested in, so I have read this, and I appreciate the work that he did to bring it into English so I could read it. And in that tiny town of Redford, Texas, population, they're probably down to 80 or so now. When I was living in the town, there was an outward bound field school that left and may have recently returned. It was a major economic generator for the town, since a lot of the agriculture collapsed because of erosion to the irrigation system. But there was this outward bound instructor, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Rolf Gork, and a really interesting person. He was very quiet. I never really spoke to him much. He was probably 60, maybe when I was living there. I've looked him up online, and I found another book that he'd written maybe about 8 years ago or so. This is a sort of a quasi-autobiographical novel, and the writing is enjoyable, and it's just kind of, again, it's wonderful to, as I said earlier on, to meet somebody that you just can't quite figure out, because you just sort of watch their behavior, and then a very quiet, introverted man who liked to spend time hiking around in the mountains, the forest, the deserts, and then you open up this book with all these sort of rangy, poetic passages. It's a wonderful dichotomy to experience. I also became a reader and a fan of Denise Chavez's works. She is a cousin of Enrique, and grew up in that area, and still has family there. She lives in southern New Mexico at the moment, and she's got I think, a new book coming out, and so, because of knowing her name and knowing that she was an author, and I think that when this book came out, I went to a signing that she was giving, maybe at a Borders bookstore, and just a exquisitely beautiful book, which now we're moving on to another area, San Antonio. And speaking of Denise Chavez, I found out once I started working with people in the theater realm in San Antonio that she had spent some time there workshopping and I think producing a play of hers, maybe The Last of the Menu Girls, which I think was a collection of short stories that she had sort of turned into a play. So it kind of takes us to the world of Jumpstart Performance Company, right there. So Playworks is an anthology of work that had been staged at Jumpstart and created by the ensemble, the company members, or invited collaborative guests. Edited by Sterling Houston, who was a writer and a theater artist who I was aware of, but I never met. He passed away before I became involved with the company. But we have work in here by, let's see, we've got Sterling. We've got Doyle Avant, who a wonderful actor and performance artist, just a sort of a monologuist kind of performer. And he has been teaching English for several years now in Beirut. We have S.T. Shimmy, who is a dancer, writer, performance artist, and I'd worked with her on quite a few occasions for sort of experimental dance films, and she sadly passed away a few years back. And some of the people that I didn't really know all that well. And so I haven't read everything in here. A lot of them are formatted like theater pieces, like plays, which aren't always the most satisfying things to read. When I moved to New Orleans, there was this book that Sterling Houston had written, which is a sort of a sort of a Frankenstein type story set in New Orleans that he wrote, and it's very much a kind of poetry and prose style, and very sort of beautiful, evocative writing. And I'm glad I was able to pick this up. I think it may... can't remember if I got this new. I bought it online. Maybe it was a used copy. And also another company member of Jumpstart, Dino Fox, a book of poetry by him. Went to a signing and reading that he did when this book came out. 2013. He is now working in the Bay Area for a non-profit organization. Beautiful poetry there. And speaking of poetry, I have this little sort of art book here by it's a beautiful beautiful design here, and it is by one of my favorite poets, Anthony the poet, Anthony Flores, who is not only just a brilliant poet and a brilliant performer, but he truly understands public art and community-driven artwork. And I kind of forgot I had this thing because these little small chapbooks can kind of fall between other books. So I'm glad to have rediscovered it, and it's his poetry is always wonderful to hear, and this is maybe the first time I had the opportunity to sit down and just kind of read it and take my time with it. Um, this is High Pink by Franco Mondini Ruiz, and so Franco is a visual artist and doing a lot of sort of assemblage, um, perhaps more than well, he does some two-dimensional work as well. This I think was a program from a show he had. Um, I believe somewhere in New York City, um, when he was getting a great deal of attention. I was given this book by him when I was operating the camera for uh, a sort of distance online virtual interview TV thing that a filmmaker from Australia was doing. So we were sort of Skyping from San Antonio to, well, we weren't necessarily Skyping. I think that maybe she had, it's been a while. I don't really remember how the whole thing unfolded, but it was interesting just being in his home, his studio, surrounded by all the art, and then to get this book that actually is really quite lovely, and it has a foreword or a kind of contextual, perhaps opening poem by Sandra Cisneros, and I have over the years owned most of Sandra's books and read most of them, or at least a big chunk of them. And she was my neighbor. She lived across the street, half a block down. And I don't seem to have any more of her books. Before I moved to San Antonio, I was, matter of fact, I think I was maybe living down in Redford when I was reading maybe some of her short stories. I think that House on Mango Street is an extraordinary book, and I met Sandra a few times. She never really seemed to remember me, but I don't really like going up and talking to authors and gushing over them. But sadly, as much as I like her work, this is the only thing I can find around here that has any of her writing in it. And speaking of Franco, after we'd done the interview, me and the a production assistant who was also a company member from Jumpstart, and a local artist who was basically asking Franco the questions. Franco did paintings of each one of us, so I've got an original Franco. Was it? And he signed it. I guess this is describing me, a man of few words. So that was nice. Let's see. And then and I have this one on here because this, I was still living in San Antonio when my partner Lori and I decided to chase a full solar eclipse. We were looking for an area maybe around Missouri or something, and on the way we stopped to visit a friend of hers in Locust Grove, Oklahoma, Sean Perkins, who sort of self-publishes a bunch of books, her and I think her sisters as well, and they always are so well edited. This isn't one of the more arresting covers, but one of the sisters ran a coffee shop, and you'd see all of their books in there. And this is it's like sort of a Nancy Drew mystery, but it's told in verse. And I've read some of her other stuff, but I haven't finally gotten around to reading this one yet. The conceit to it is wonderful. And then I have Marisol Cortez, Lose at Midnight. This is Marisol is one of these really fascinating community activists and organizers. She had left San Antonio to pursue a PhD in, I guess, sociology. And she's written some really great um, studies when she moved back to San Antonio about sort of the gentrification and its impact on um, some of the more fragile, impoverished neighborhoods. But I did not know that while she was working on those more sort of working in art and cultural nonprofits and doing this kind of community sociology, this sort of activism in this sort of academic manner, that she was also working on fiction. I knew she was a poet. I'd heard her read a few poems, but I didn't know that she was working on not just a novel, but um, a big fucking novel. And both Lori and I got a copy to show our support of it, and we were reading it sort of at the same time. Lori's a much faster writer than me. I mean, reader than me, faster writer as well. But we were able to kind of recognize people that we know, sort of slightly uh, camouflaged in here, and it's set in San Antonio in that sort of art and cultural milieu. To be somebody who's worked in art nonprofits and to enjoy a really good fictional depiction of a board meeting is really it might just be the last thing that anybody wants to read, but I was digging it. But there's so much going on in here, and it is just it is breathlessly beautifully written. There are times when I just would have to stop. It's like, oh my god, because I know Marisol fairly well, and I've had lengthy conversations with her, but they seem to be either more kind of just casual small talk and gossip about people that we know, or these more elevated topics that she was involved in. Her and her partner also do a fair amount of work on a lot of work in climate issues, and this is sort of fits into that kind of climate ecological fiction. It's awesome. But so Lori and I, were like reading this a little at a time, and we were discussing it, um, and I don't have too many of those situations where I'm able to be so engaged with a book and read it at the same time as somebody else who's really engaged in it. Now we're moving to New Orleans. This is Louis Maestro, The Sound of Building Coffins. This is Lori's book. She knew of Louis before we moved here. She had been visiting the city for quite a while, and it is just this beautiful, beautiful historical novel. And Louis is a really kind and wonderful person. He was living in New Orleans proper until kind of recently. He moved across the Industrial Canal over in the town of Araby, where he lives in an old historical building that he's turned into a bookstore. So I think that's wonderful. And I think he's currently working on a sequel to this. I do think that this got as much critical acclaim as it deserved, but that was a while back. It's been a while. There was a this is I think that this is might be a reprint, but this particular edition is Crescent City Books, which is a local, I think it's a bookstore and a publishing company. I don't know if they're still currently in business. There was a staged version of this. Louis had written a short play of some of the scenes from this for a theater festival right when Laurie and I had moved to town, so we went to go see it. and apparently the person who had been brought in as a director um, declined right like halfway through, and so Louis had to take it upon himself to direct, which I don't think is something he had done before. What I really like about this book is that the author blurb on the front by Donald Harrington. I don't know a lot of people that know Donald Harrington, and I was mentioning his name to Louis, maybe because I saw his name on the book, and he said, "Oh yeah, he was it's like one of Louis's favorite authors, and may have actually been in a creative writing class taught by him." And speaking of Louis and his bookstore, Louis's wife, Izzy, had a book signing at, I think it was or maybe it was just that she was there doing a reading and had some of these for sale. And so we picked her poetry book up, The Year is Sunday. Let's see what else we got here. There's a Cameron Lovejoy, who runs a sort of a poetry reading series, also has started putting out some poetry publications. These are just gorgeous. The PDFs are free to download, but he has these just wonderfully designed and bound copies. I think that the review might have gone on hiatus for a while because of the pandemic, and I think it's been started back up again. Just a stunning job of layout and design, and everything about this just made me so happy to know that people are still making beautiful books, and some of the writers in here I know, and some of them I don't. Some of them are local, and some of them aren't. But it's nice to just have something to occasionally dip into and read, and then you realize that, oh, Colleen Rothman, I've seen her read here before, or there's again, it's all that sort of expanding your understanding of what other writers in your region are working on. Another author that we've met here is, she's mostly known for poetry, Lisa Passold. So we have her most recent collection of poetry. Forgot the title at the moment, but I got like this because I heard that she had written a novel, and this is some years back. I don't know if this is a library edition or if they were done in hardback as well. She got a grant. She's from Canadian, I guess she's Canadian, and got some sort of grant from the some Canadian organization, perhaps to have this beautiful hardcover book. This is an historical novel that is just weird and beautiful, and it's a great deal of fun to read. And let's see, another not known as an author so much, but as a musician, Quintron. He has a book, Europa, My Mirror, which is sort of about his touring with his band, and he did a signing at the local library in the Bywater, and so we went and got his book, got it signed, listened to him read from it. I really enjoyed it. It's a very, very good book. One of my oldest friends, Pete Barnstrom, who is in our online writing group, did this with his sometimes writing partner, Jamie Nash. They work on some film projects every now and then. But they did a kid's book. And I don't know if I read this because no, he wasn't workshopping it with the group. So, but I think he might have sent out some PDFs of it. So I'm not sure. I must have read it in situ with the illustrations. I have utmost respect for Pete and always love his writing. So that's nice to have something come out. Another local friend, Brian Fairbanks, more of a journalist background. This is a nonfiction book on sort of the rise of American right-wing politics and its connection to the sort of Louisiana political scene. Vanderbilt University Press, who you would think would be able to get a better design for it. Maybe give a little bit of a 3D effect. I know they're trying to do some sort of clan type thing. I don't know. So, this book here I heard about while watching these weekly sort of video blogs put up on YouTube by Otis Gibbs, who's a singer-songwriter out of Indianapolis. I like his music, but I don't know how I came across his YouTube channel. Very laid back, very conversational, and I think I like his personality a little bit more than I like his music. But they're sort of story songs, and he's a very good writer. But sometimes he's on his there in front of the camera on his porch drinking coffee or whatever, and talking sometimes about books that he had just read. And this was an article I think he'd found, and I ended up also finding it online, about when Ray Davies was in New Orleans years ago, not that long ago, and he was shot. I did not know this. He was shot in the leg, and he was here for maybe a month recuperating. And so there was this article, I think, I'm trying to think who wrote it. I think it was written by Michael Patrick Welch, who had written a novel. And when he realized that a friend of his, I think, or someone he knew, owned the house that Ray Davies was recuperating in, and somehow finagled knew that Ray Davies was there, and he was bored, and he was going through all the books in the guy's house. He said, "Give him this book," and found out that not only did Ray Davies read his book, but he enjoyed it, and so I'd never heard of Michael Patrick Welch until Otis Gibbs mentioned him. I found a used copy online. I think it might be out of print, and I've only kind of read a couple of chapters in here. I'm going to sit down and plow through it. I like the writing. It's very sort of absurdist, but it's the life of a young person trying to make their way in New Orleans, moving here from Florida, which is also Michael Patrick Welch's own. It's fairly autobiographical, but it's heightened into making it more weird and wonderful. Gerald Schlickling, Handling Filth, Simple Sabotage Field Manual. This is a book of poetry, and so Jared isn't from here. I don't know him. I met him because he was published. This book here was published by Unlikely Books, which is a New Orleans publishing concern that also puts out a online literary journal, Unlikely Stories, which I had submitted a piece to. It had been accepted, and the man who runs Unlikely Books and Unlikely Stories invited me to be a guest reader, sort of like an opening act, because Jared was coming to town for his book release party. Um, so I was able to talk to him and buy his book, and um, it's it's this sort of brainy poetry with footnotes, which I should like, and I kind of do. But I think what made it interesting was having heard him read, having spoken to him, and having sat down and read his work. And so it whether this is a legitimate way to talk about um, written work as the biographical feelings you have, or the feelings you have of the biographical life, the real life of the writer. I don't know. And of course, everyone should have copies of things published by incredibly important people in their lives. I don't own this. Lori has a piece in here, and maybe I should buy one. I don't know if it's support her, but she got a free copy of the Conscious River Review. And what do they have it listed under? It's listed under nonfiction, and it's Llano, Texas, and back again. Llano, Texas has two L's, and you think it should be pronounced Llano now. Um, anyway, that was great. They published it, and it was from a performance art piece that she had done. And we'll end it with a thing that isn't really a San Antonio writer, but it kind of sums up everything. And I bought it when I lived here because it came out when I lived here. And this is Retablos by Octavio Solis, published by City Lights Books. So Octavio Solis I knew from Dallas. In my early 20s, I was living in a warehouse in Deep Ellum area of Dallas. And at that point, the Dallas theater scene was in its, a kind of renaissance. There was the Under Main, there was the Deep Ellum Theater Garage, there was the there's about four or so really wonderful sort of experimental theater companies, and Octavio was this young playwright who made a living as a bartender, and I'd see him tending bar here and there around town, and I never really spoke to him, but I went to see every one of his plays that came out, and he was incredibly prolific, and I forget where he was in his own life, because I found out later that he had spent time in San Antonio at the Trinity Theater Department, I think. So when he was in Dallas, I'm not sure where he was going to theater graduate school, but I'd seen him as a performer. He would act in some of his pieces, and I'm trying to remember if he would often direct them or not. His writing is just amazing, and his great love, as he say time and again, was Shakespeare, and the way that he would take this kind of barrio identity, magical realist theater pieces, and fuse it with this kind of Shakespearean rhythm and sometimes elevated diction. It walked that sort of that line that's kind of hard to get to bring in these seemingly disparate worlds and make it work. And some of my best theater going experiences was seeing Octavio's work. When I moved to San Antonio, he had a play just out, and he wasn't living in San Antonio. He was living in the Bay Area, San Francisco, I guess, teaching at a university there and continuing to write. And he had a play called Lydia, I think, and I forgot who directed it. He was in town for I think the rehearsals of it, Manessa, a jumpstart connection was in there and just did this amazing performance. It was an incredible play, and I maybe it was at that moment that I realized that he had this San Antonio connection too. He also has a connection to far west Texas. He grew up in El Paso, which is where all of these stories are set. So the landscape, the Mexicano culture, the border culture of this particular type, a particular region of the Rio Grande, it's an area and a sensibility that I feel a strong connection to and a pretty good understanding of. And these are short stories, and they're all kind of tied together. It's called Stories from a Life Lived Along the Border, but it does have a feel of a novel, and it is just a joy to read. And I'm so, I feel strange saying I'm so proud of him, but here's somebody who has his literary life has kept him alive. It has put food on the table. It's brought him his family, and he's now living in Oregon for, I think, because he was working with the Oregon Shakespeare Society, which was involved in this sort of recontextualizing of all of Shakespeare's plays. I kind of forgot what that bigger project is. So I think he's still there now. But just beautiful stuff. And there is no reason whatsoever that Octavio Solis knows who I am, but I've seen him up on stage, talking to the audience, or before or after a play. I've seen so many of his works, and again, to see that sort of other side of his writing, and where he's because there's a different sort of vulnerability that you give your characters to present to audiences than when you're dealing with these sort of versions of your own past in this kind of fictional memoir. And there's a lot of revelation, I think, that's in there. Anyway, let's see, looking down at my notes, my outro. So, what an oddly haphazard collection. A bunch of books curated more by chance than intention, trying to find a through line in this stack of books would be a waste of time. It's as random as the contents of your local library's book return box. Well, maybe not quite that random. But many of these books I wouldn't have bought if I hadn't known the author or been in the author's sort of proximity. You can tell a lot about people from their book collections. It's an opportunity to learn their special interest, hobbies, obsessions. Often you get a sort of roadmap of someone's intellectual or aesthetic growth. If you're attentive, each volume will make perfect sense in its inclusion. Well, often there will be some exceptions, things that just don't seem to belong. So here's a trick. If you're at a friend's house perusing the bookcase and you see a book that seems out of place, pull it out. Chances are it'll have a warm and lengthy inscription from the author thanking the owner for all your wonderful, warm support and encouragement over the years. So this is your opportunity to be somebody being supportive and encouraging to the writers in your life or in your community. Get out there, show up for them, be part of their life, let them be part of yours. That's it. That's all I got to say. Thank you.